In April, I left my home in the company of my loving cat to head to an event where people dress like this,
Oh, silver coins.
chant like this, win prizes like this, and celebrate your demise like this. Welcome to Battle Camper and the weird and wonderful 7 Stones. On an unhelpfully warm Saturday morning, I set off not on my usual trek across the country, but just 17 miles to Twickenham in West London, where the event was being held at St Mary's University. I arrived early during the setup on the Saturday and was greeted by an array of brilliantly presented boards. Clearly a lot of thought had gone into these, and I was really excited about the weekend's gaming ahead. I'd be doing something I've not done before, and gaming with someone I've not met before, in this case, Carl. We'd had to bosh our list together at short notice, so I grant you it's not the most original theme you'll see, but it is themey. It was a Pelennor Fields list. I was taking Rohan with Theoden, Dernhelm, a smattering of Royal Guard, and a bunch of riders. No one had spears except for Dernhelm. Carl was taking Aragorn with Anduril, the King of the Dead, a Herald, and a bunch of regular ghosty boys, all with shields for the tasty defense 8. In the name of theminess, the tournament organisers had agreed we'd be counted as green allies. However, the Rohan would suffer the negative effects of the King of the Dead's Harbinger of Evil, meaning -1 courage within 12 inches. After all, it's not like the riders knew the ghosts would be there. Also, I am going to assume you've not listened to a word that I've said, because you're ogling Carl's miniatures. They are stunning, so I guess that's fair enough. Anyway, the last thing for me to do was to get into my outfit for the weekend. Needless to say, it was a normal outfit that any 31-year-old would consider appropriate for public dress. By which I of course mean it was a £100 cobbled together Rider of Rohan costume, purchased by my subscribers who I really hope didn't expect me to spend their money in anything but the most fiscally irresponsible manner imaginable. At least our opponents for Game 1 had got the memo. Archie and Theo would be taking a double mummock list. One mummock had the war leader in it, but no other warriors in the howdah. The other mummock had a howdah full of serpent raiders. The game would be Reconnoiter, and for those who don't know, in short, it means we're trying to get our models off the opposing board edge. And with that, we're ready to go. Well, actually, one last thing. We do have to talk about that little marble in the middle of the board. That is a Palantir, a custom rule for this tournament. It is a light object that can be picked up and carried off the board. It doesn't have any bearing on winning the game, but it can be used once per game to automatically win priority. As long as you can keep hold of it, it will go with you from game to game until someone prizes it from your cold, dead hands. And if you can keep it, or even gather more throughout the tournament, you take them home with you. This is a wonderful little rule that gives the games a sense of cohesive narrative thrust, that ties the theme into that of the tournament, and for some reason drives all the players up the wall trying to take and hold these little marbles glued to bases. Anyway, on with the game. The first thing we had to do was roll to see if the warbands would be arriving in turn 1. For us, first up was Aragorn's warband. Yep, he's on. Theoden's warband. 1! No, he's not coming on.
He's not on yet.
Not a great start, but at least Dernhelm arrived to salvage the situation. Eowyn is arriving. So with both mummocks arriving first turn, riding out to meet them was just Dernhelm and 7 riders, Aragorn, the King of the Dead, and 6 ghosts. A single mummock trample can turn the tide of a whole game, so we would have to be careful and evasive to stop them from, quite literally, walking all over us. You'll probably see that as the mummock enters the board edge, which is how deployment works in Reconnoiter, it is removing trees from its path. That is because we decided that it can trample trees which are considered to have a defense of 6 and a single wound, otherwise on this table, things are going to get real tight, real quick. Both mummocks had turned up in the first turn. Now, since one has a red top and one has a bluey-purple top, I'm going to refer to them as the skimmed mummock and the full-fat mummock, respectively. I'm feeling slightly nervous now at the side. A key early game choice is whether or not we should ride for the Palantir. We'd have to stop once we got it, which means we were exposed to a counter-trample.
Any shooting?
I moved by full 10, I'm afraid.
I think we're all in range.
Oh, God.
Take Eowyn off her horse if you can.
All 5 for Eowyn.
Yeah, and then I guess one in the way with the front guy.
Never take up freedom!
Oh.
Good start.
Yeah, that's over.
First one
Goes through, yeah.
Second one
Doesn't, so up or down. Rider. They need a 6 to kill the in the way rider.
And now you got Eowyn.
Horse. 5 again.
Yeah!
Right, I'm horse lording now. So we've got it on.
Yeah.
So we're back to priority then.
Yeah. Is it my roll?
Do you want to roll for us?
I'll roll for us again.
Good luck. Big pressure.
Big Sam. Oh, that's us.
Side note, one of the things I'm loving about editing this video is hearing the confidential conversations between opposing teammates through the lapel microphones that they're wearing. Like so.
I think we wait until they pick up the
store.
Plantier and then trample the person that gets it. That's my thinking.
It's very cheeky, and it might seem like an obvious move in hindsight, but at the time we really thought they were gunning for the Plantier themselves. With the second Mummock's move, it successfully trampled every single tree in its path and advanced menacingly on Dernhelm and her 6 riders.
Well done, Mummock.
So we're going to move up and we're going to grab the Plantier, so I want to avoid the difficult terrain. So one rider is going to be very, very brave.
Yeah.
And do a terror check to try and charge the Mummock.
Sure. Ooh.
I believe in great words.
6.
Yeah, because of the
8,
war
9, 10
horn.
because of the horn.
Oh, yeah.
No!
He's literally solo horse charge.
Here for you.
So, at the end of our second move phase, Aragorn had led the ghosts up the field, with the King of the Dead bringing up the rear. Dernhelm had moved off to the near side and sheltered behind a wall. Her warband had spread out in order to minimise the impact of any stampede damage we'd take next turn. And now it was time to roll for Theoden's warband in the hope that he'd actually show up and help this time. Come on, so I need a 3-up. Yes! So better late than never, Theoden's warband arrived to take on this daunting threat. But when moving them onto the field, I had a terrible realisation. The war horn is in this warband, so it wasn't on the table when I failed that. So he got stuck there.
So you should be back there.
Yeah, he should be back there. Sorry about that.
Oh, yeah.
So he's
No
definitely
worries.
not off the most heroic.
Yeah, screw him. Yeah.
With that dealt with, there was an uneventful round of shooting without casualties on either side, and that was it for the turn.
Back to priority.
Alright, we're using the Plantier then.
I'm not sure there's any point in calling anything to counter because I don't think we're in trample range of anything. Yeah, so yeah, your priority.
So we'd used the Plantier to auto-win priority, and the one warrior carrying it bravely beelined for the board edge. Alright guys, we're having a go at some charges here, so we'll start on the left-hand side.
The
here.
brave guy.
Yeah, exactly.
The brave,
This is his
cowardly,
opportunity.
brave guy.
Now the horn is here. Oh, no, he's not. When all was said and done, only a single rider had mustered the courage to charge the Mummock. And whilst it does certainly suck to be that guy, he was at least joined by brave Dernhelm. I mean, this could have been a horrible mistake, obviously.
Yeah, obviously.
After the Rohirrim have done their admittedly limited amount of charging, the ghosties continue their walk up to the Mummocks. At their rear comes the King of the Dead. Now, for anyone not familiar with Mummocks, you should know that the King of the Dead is basically their worst nightmare. Mummocks are big, expensive flesh fortresses with a whole pile of wounds, but if they just suffer one wound from the King of the Dead, then the model will be removed from play immediately. To make matters worse, whenever a Mummock suffers a wound from any model, it has to take a leadership test, and if it fails the leadership test, it will stampede, meaning that we would get to control it for the next turn. The King's Harbinger of Evil special rule will reduce their leadership by 1, so God, do they really want to trample him out of the game and not risk getting into combat with him. Now, our position was much more precarious on the far side of the board, where the bulk of my forces had been absolutely bottlenecked by the 2 clumps of woods, and they were staring down the barrel end of a trampling.
To war!
This was not an ideal place for Theoden to be standing, if I'm being completely honest. He would need to survive a round of shooting and then pray to win the inevitable move-off in round 3.
Shooting.
So,
Your shots first.
yes. So I've got, everyone here didn't move, so 7 shots. So these are all going on this guy with the horn.
Sure.
Hitting on 4s, so he didn't move.
Oh man, that is a terrible.
Unfortunate.
No, it's the Howder. So you can wound the Howder.
No, that was
that is bad.
poor. That was very poor. In return fire from the far Mummock, a royal guardsman was thrown from his horse. First blood for the tournament. Alright, I'm going to strike with Dernhelm. Cool. So into fights, and Dernhelm has performed a heroic strike, automatically bringing her above the Mummock's fight value.
You've got the 6, so I don't roll.
So we got 1. We then used a might on the 5 to get 2 wounds on the Mummock. Sadly, using the War Chieftain's courage, it passed both tests and would not be stampeding this time.
Cool. All right, well, we're on to priority then.
Is it my role?
Do you want to take it?
Yeah.
Actually, the pressure's so high now.
Oh, no! I think we're going to have to call some moves, aren't we?
Oh yeah, I think.
Yeah, I reckon we both call a move.
What moves? So moves on both monarchs.
Moves on both.
We countercalled with Theoden and with Aragorn. Neither really fancied spending the rest of the game stuck to the underside of a mummock's foot. So, it was time for a classic heroic move-off. An extremely high stakes classic heroic move-off.
4 to 6 is okay for us.
We got
It's
it.
you.
Despite that win, we could still only move with half the army, and we decided to go with Aragorn, the King of the Dead, and Dernhelm on the near side. This meant that Theoden's contingent would be facing a trample this turn.
Right.
I think that's right.
We're rolling a
Courage check.
terror check for Dernhelm and
Yeah.
thinking big thoughts.
Oh, that's
Six,
enough.
got it.
That's going to be enough.
So she's going to wrap right around the back.
Yeah, presumably throw her spear.
Thank you very much. I'm really glad you're here because I'd forgotten again.
I played Rohan quite a bit, so I remember. I know the pain of forgetting spears raised.
He's not on the terrain,
Yeah,
but
there you go.
exactly. Perfect. Thank you very much. There we go. Take it away.
Do you want to throw your spear?
Oh my god! I'm such a nightmare. No, that's what I
Okay,
that's
fine,
justice.
fine.
That's what that is.
Good.
Yeah.
You guys are Courage 6 or something, aren't you? The Army of the Dead boys.
Well, they've got war hunts at Courage 7.
Oh yeah, they're Courage 7.
Given the Dead of Dunharrow would only fail their terror checks on a Snake Eyes, it wasn't long before they were all in combat with the Mummock, including the King of the Dead. However, that was it for our fun with Aragorn's heroic move, and it was now time for the Purple Howded Mummock to have its own fun with Theoden's warband. The way that Trample works is any model they come into contact with, they will roll 4 Strength 9 hits against them because of his tusk weapons. As long as they kill it, they will keep going with their 8-inch move. This would catch Theoden and the entire force on that side of the board.
Don't bottle the first one, please. Yeah, there's one.
Oh my god, this is awful. Too late.
8mm.
He's dead.
Okay.
Yep.
So who that will have been? That guy.
So Banner next, I think.
Yeah, Banner next. Yeah.
Dead.
Oh god.
And then I think it's going to be Theoden.
Then it's Theoden.
Right, so you need 3 threes to guarantee his death, 2 threes to take it to a roll.
Of course he's dead.
I'll take that. I will take that.
So, the Mummock managed to trample Theoden's horse whilst leaving Theoden himself entirely unscathed, which is actually impressive in an unhelpful kind of way. Because Theoden survived, the trample comes to an end, but Theoden does get locked in combat, which turns his move off, which means we go to the skimmed Mummock's heroic move.
Right, not ideal. But also, that could have been so much worse.
My heroic move, he is going to
your big red moment?
hurl himself off the Mummock to tag the King of the Dead.
Oh, nice.
He takes 5, he will be prone, he takes 5 strength 3 hits. My thing is, this Mummock is probably dead fighting the King of the Dead. So he's going to hurl himself off and hope he survives.
So how many hits does he take?
So he takes 5. There's 2.
2. Oh.
So he's got 1 wound, 2 fate.
So the Mummock War Leader is now knocked prone with 1 wound, locked in combat with the King of the Dead. But he might just have saved his now unmanned Mummock from a ghostly death this turn. Also, he's just pulled off one of the most baller moves I've ever seen in all of wargaming.
Cool. So now it's our priority moves.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
And the Palantir is yours.
They are notoriously cowardly, especially this guy here. But that means he needs an opportunity to redeem himself. I think if he leaves now, he'll never be able to live with himself.
Yeah, that's true.
He won't be able to look at himself in the mirror if he has a mirror. So we've got to give it a whirl.
Oh, he's in! He's in!
Redemption indeed. So next one along is going to do the same thing. No, so that one is staying still now. He's passed on his cowardice.
On the far side of the board, we attempted to clear the bottleneck with a number of riders simply moving straight past the Mummock. The rest moved into combat, looking to assist their king, who stood fast against very long odds.
We'll strike with Dernhelm.
So she's
that's
out
her
of
last point of might.
Yeah.
That's Mary's.
That's Mary's,
point.
yeah.
So where do we want to go first?
I don't mind. Do this one over here.
Yeah, happy with that. So Roll strike, see if I can feint afterwards.
You can't, because you'd go down to 5. So you've got 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Right, come on, Mimic. You got to botch your roll.
No 6s yet, so...
Oh, come on.
Yet. Oh my god, no.
Come on. Yes! Mimic.
So striking Dernhelm and an entire contingent of dead warriors fail to subdue the skimmed Mummock.
Oh, that was not ideal. Right, where are the hits going?
I'm going to go for 3 troops.
Okay, great.
So needing 4s on these guys. Okay, one. Let's take the one. This one. This one, please.
Okay. So, are we doing King of the Dead next, or are we going to try and get some more success over here?
We'll just do the
King of the Dead, get him done.
So my strike doesn't matter because I go above you. I'm fight 5. Do you want to roll?
He also doesn't have a deck.
Sorry?
I'd be disappointed, Mike.
The Mummock war leader mighted up to a 4, but the King of the Dead followed suit, meaning that the king took it overall.
He's dead.
He's dead.
Alright, lovely stuff.
To be better, he would already been wounded.
Can you just give us this, please?
With that sorted, it was time for Theoden and the bulk of his forces on the far side of the board to take on the full-fat Mummock. It was important that they at least held ground. They were the only thing standing between that Mummock and its escape.
So I've got 7 over this side, and I've got the might. I've got the fight, but that sounds awfully familiar in a not...
I've differentiated Theoden's strikes on green dice because they can be mighted.
Can it happen twice in a row?
Don't let me down. No. Alright, we got it on 5.
Oh, there's 2.
So we've got...
With combats done, we were back to yet another vital priority. They won it. Theoden called a move, and the full-fat Mummock countered.
We need a heroic move win. Big win here.
1, 2, or 3.
If you could do me a big favour, I'd be very grateful.
No! Yes!
Can't!
With their heroic move, the purple-topped Mummock simply turned tail and ran. They figured that their best hope of winning now was to break us, rather than simply trying to leave the board with a howdah full of warriors. They made a cracking start of trying to break us by immediately trampling 4 of my riders who were trying to escape off the board themselves.
Does Dernhelm leaving count as 1 model leaving or 2 models
So
leaving?
what you can do is you can run her off, dismount and
and
then you count as 2.
That's cheeky, but let's do that, yeah.
I do enjoy that at the first opportunity, Dernhelm's just like, yeah, cool, see ya. Anyway, after all the moves were done, there was a bloodless shooting phase, and then we were on to combats. And Aragorn and his contingent, that Dernhelm had just ditched, closed in on the skimmed Mummock.
Yours first.
We can at least...
Right, I'll give you a target. Oh, I get the 6. So you've got 3 with Aragorn, 2 with King of the Dead, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes.
So that's Aragorn.
Okay.
So you can might it if necessary.
That's the king.
Yeah, you got it. If you do a single wound with the King of the Dead, it's dead. Oh, it's solid 2!
So in one of those bizarre quirks in a game that's usually quite measured, the King of the Dead takes 8 wounds from a Mummock with a single roll of a 4.
So we actually have the fight over this side.
Yeah.
We're fight 5. So let's roll up, see if we get that 6. Not so far.
Okay.
It's all on you.
Oh, it's all on me.
It's all on you. Sorry.
Ooh, that is doable. 3.
All ones, all...
Yeah. Yeah.
Dead.
And then you need a 4
Dismount.
off the last.
Dead.
Oh, yeah.
Not a great turn for us. We're close to breaking now.
Priority. Shall I roll this one? Because I'm not going to be doing much rolling now.
Oh, yeah, mate.
A bad start to a critical turn for Team Elephant. With the skimmed Mummock dead and only the full-fat Mummock left in play, they need to get this trample off, which means they need to win the move off to stop me from locking them in place. To that end, they burn their last point of might, and we use Aragorn's free might to call our move.
Goes to...
Yeah.
Evil
Okay,
again.
what do we think? Oh, because you pivot as well, so you're going to have a big... So you might actually hit the King of the Dead and or Aragorn.
Oh!
Yeah, I reckon do that.
Yeah?
Yeah. That's what would a Mummock do? Yeah, because if we kill those 4, Big if,
Big it.
we kill those 4, then we break them.
And so the now familiar trampling begins again. I've already lost 7 riders to tramples from the full fat mummock alone. Now, as they try and work their way toward the King of the Dead, they've got to get through 3 ghosts and one of the last riders of Rohan.
Oh, got the 6.
Dead?
Just, oh my god.
So close. Thank you very much.
This fellow. Dead. Yeah. This guy. Dead. Yeah. And then the king. Oh. 2 wounds.
3 fate.
Yeah. So we need all 3 of these fate to fail. Ah, 2. Ah.
So the king survived, and to be honest, that essentially brought the game to an end. In the ensuing combat, the king claimed a second mummock scalp, and those warriors that did survive the fall from the howdah could do nothing to turn the tide. It had been a fantastic game. It was brutal, but it was also close run through pretty much the entire thing, which led to a huge number of nail-biter moments, pivotal roles that could change the course of the game. On top of this, the theme couldn't have worked out better if we'd planned it ourselves, and our opponents were fantastic, a huge amount of fun, and with some great moves throughout the game. We also left with a Palantir in Dernhelm's hands, which gave me some uncharacteristic confidence going into Game 2. Now, in the closest thing that this channel has to a recurring segment, I now need to apologise for some technical issues. In short, I plugged the receiver cable for my lapel microphones in the wrong way round, like a true professional. So you're basically just going to have to deal with me solid narrating the next 2 games. This does a huge disservice to our opponents for the next 2 games, all of whom were very patient while I faffed around with cameras and microphones, and of course, turned up the charm to boot. So apologies to you if you're watching. I hope we can meet again in a future event to do it justice. After lunch, we head into Game 2. This one would be total conquest. One of the armies from each side becomes the primary force, and they deploy within 6 inches of the centre of the board. For us, that was Carl's miniatures, and for them, it was the Blue Dragon. The other person's force, so for us, my Rohan, and for them, some Easterlings comprising of Brorgir, Rutabi, and a bunch of Black Dragons, then deploy using the random deployment Maelstrom rules. And we're then simply trying to control the 5 objectives on the table.
Very best of luck, guys.
Yeah, good luck, have fun.
Let's see what nonsense we're about to have.
With Carl's forces deployed right next to that dragon, it would be a crucial turn 1 priority roll.
2. 1.
And Evil get it. A cracking start.
So I'll call a heroic move with Aragorn just because.
So Carl calls a heroic move with Aragorn's eternally 3 points of might, and I do enjoy the depth of Carl's tactical thinking extending to the words, just because. Like, imagine if he were your actual battlefield commander. But it's certainly true that with the dragon being defense 9 and having 9 wounds, we definitely want to lock it in place and stop it from causing chaos across the board. So the Ghosty Boys did what Ghosty Boys do and flowed across Weathertop to lock in the dragon. We were hoping that the King of the Dead would again use a single swing to claim an outsized zoological scalp, but Team Evil had a counter up their sleeves.
That's going to take a courage to try and charge the King of the Dead. Fails just. Yep.
That's a big one for us. It means the bats can't pair off the King of the Dead, and for anyone not in the know, bats also half the fight value of a model they're in combat with, meaning it can be impossible to strike up. With that done, it was time to see if and where Rutabi's warband would be showing up this turn. A 2 means that we'd be choosing where they show up, and we perhaps ill-advisedly chose the far corner behind the dragon to try and contain their forces and stop them from scooping up uncontested objectives on the rest of the board. However, you'll see that Brorgir's warband rolled higher on the table, therefore scuppering the plan and deploying on the opposite side of the board where we had nothing to oppose them. It was then our priority move, and therefore my turn to see if Dernhelm's and Theoden's warband would be showing up to help this turn.
Right, so we'll roll for,
and then I'm dropping a guy off.
Dernhelm's warband first, because that's the one that doesn't really show up and I feel bad.
So Dernhelm is coming on in a location of our opponent's choosing. Conveniently, at least from a reaching perspective, it was determined that Dernhelm's warband would come on right where I was already standing, in the near side corner. Now it's Theoden's turn to roll.
It just comes out.
The decision now was whether to spend a might to get him onto the table this turn. Carl counselled in favour of this option, but I decided that since the dragon was pretty much on lockdown, and even on a 2, he'd be going somewhere obscure at our opponent's choosing, then it was best simply to wait a turn, be patient, and he'll show up in his own time. After all, it is fluffy for Theoden to be late, which is presumably why he has been late for both of today's games.
You don't want to spend any money.
See this is what we call psychology.
This is mind games, yeah. I am keeping the one.
That's a really interesting. That's interesting. Okay, cool.
With that relatively firmly established, it was time to go on to shooting from the two sniper gobbos on the walls.
We'll do 2 shots down at Aragorn.
Yeah, sounds good.
5's to hit. A hit? Oh my goodness. Defense 6. Has he got a bow?
And that was it for shooting, after my riders had all moved 10, so we were on to combats. The King of the Dead called a strike in his fight against the dragon. He would need a 2 to match the dragon's fight and a 3 to beat it. In return, the dragon also called strike, so it was time for a strike-off.
Right, need a good roll on this. Right, watch for the 1.
This is your strike roll. No, 4, that's your 9. So basically, anything
How do you feel about it? Don't say the words. Anything you filthy man.
So I'm letting him
The big fight 10.
So the dragon still has the fight value, we just have to hope he fluffs his duel roll. And they do, sort of. We roll a 5 high, and they roll a 4 high. But they use the last point of might to draw the duel roll and therefore win it on fight value. They then do something quite clever. They decide to barge. For anyone not in the know, it means that the dragon knocks everyone it's in combat with back 3 inches and then moves d6 inches in order to re-engage a model and fight again. It's a bit like a heroic combat. Regretfully for Barney and James, they roll a 1 for the number of inches they can move, meaning they've basically just barged the King of the Dead to safety, which is kind of nice when you think about it. As a consolation prize, they figure they'll just charge a regular Warrior of the Dead with their 1 inch and fail the courage test, so we're back to priority.
That's unfortunate, guys.
That was my whole life. Fair, that courage test was
Why would you do that? That's such a mean thing to do.
Jesus, put it on me!
I'll do the next one, I promise. Still my fate is rewarded.
The forces of evil call no heroics for this movement phase, and so Carl closes in around the dragon with the Dead of Dunharrow. We decided that Carl probably now had the dragon's murder well and truly under control, and so Dernhelm's warband's assistance was not required. Instead, she would advance up the near side flank and prevent the Easterlings from intervening, and keep them controlled so they couldn't pick up objectives whilst we were distracted. With any luck then, Theoden's warband would hopefully finally arrive and do the same to the Easterlings on the far side of the board. So with that call going out, let's see if the King of Rohan will answer.
Do you want to use a might point? Can I entrust you in a might point?
I think it's time for my point.
But after that brief moment of uncharacteristic lucidity, I returned to folly and convinced Carl, once again, that it was not worth the might because things were, in my own words, under control.
Do you think that was a mistake?
Well, time will tell.
In their movement phase, the Easterlings advanced on both the far and near side of the board. They were doing a good job bunkering up on some objectives. Finally, for the move phase, the bats, who were atmospherically wheeling high above Weathertop, were commanded to charge the King of the Dead to pair him off the dragon. They needed a 9 on their courage check and fluffed it, so they remained airborne, and I can't say I blame them. Then the 2 goblins on the wall took their now familiar pot shots and, you guessed it, they fluffed it as well. There was only one combat to resolve this turn, the beast himself, the blue dragon. With Aragorn in combat, he could use his 3 points of might to heroically strike, and the dragon would have to burn his last point of might to match it, which he sensibly did. In a reversal of fortunes, Aragorn got up to fight 10, but the dragon could only make it to fight 9. So, a big duel roll for the dragon, bearing in mind that the King of the Dead could kill it with a single stroke. Fortunate then that the evil forces roll a respectable, if not ideal, 5. So Carl needs to put in the work and make sure he overcomes whatever curse has caused our rolling this game, and he does, matching the 5 and winning on fight. Aragorn strikes first with Anduril, which will always wound on a 4.
But he's still within 6.
2 wounds from Aragorn. Then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Right. So that's 1. That was 6. And then the King of the Dead. Here we go. King of the Dead.
Understandably, the dragon opted to fate the King of the Dead's wound first in order to not die immediately. The dragon now had a difficult choice to make. On the one hand, it could save its fate in case it came into contact again with the King of the Dead later in the game. On the other hand, it has the survival instinct special rule, which means that it must take a courage check for every wound it suffers, and if it fails any of them, it will flee the field immediately. Of course, this is particularly problematic given the Harbinger of Evil special rule, minusing 1 from its courage. They opted to burn the fate now, and they'd cross the Undead Kingish bridge when they come to it. This brought the turn to a close, and took us back to priority.
Oh, why would you do that? Yeah, I'll do it. Come on. Sure. Yeah, I can do it. I can do it. What do you think? Is this yours? It's free.
Yeah.
So that's easy. It's easy.
So let's get one. Let's get one.
Yes!
Team Evil call a move with Brawgear, which catches the dragon.
Okay, we're calling with Dernhelm.
Dernhelm.
Dernhelm. It is a sideways move.
Only Dernhelm.
Only Dernhelm. I know your ways now.
So I just want to clarify.
Yeah.
You're only calling a heroic move with Dernhelm.
We have got one heroic move. Dernhelm is the mover. She is the nominated mover, and only Dernhelm officially. So we've got to move off then.
An important move-off roll then as we try and lock the dragon in place to stop it from escaping. Carl entrusts me with the move-off, which was brave.
I had my little nice little 5. That's happened, and we're back to 1s, I'm afraid.
Immediately, Evil's victory in the heroic move-off began to bear fruit as Brawgear the Conjurer advanced and cast Tremor, which took a rider off his horse. After this, the rest of the Easterlings also took advantage of the heroic move to advance, both to protect the Conjurer and to stand between the dragon and the dead. Then came the turn of the dragon itself. It slipped the trap and descended on the riders. A predicament for which I shouldered my fair share of the responsibility.
You know, if you'd killed that dragon last turn, we wouldn't be in this mess.
Whoever's fault it really was, Carl's. It was time to roll to see if Theoden's warband would finally be showing up. That's right, after keeping the main body of my fighting force off the board for 2 straight turns just to save a single point of might, when they finally did arrive, it was on a 2, which meant we spent a point of might anyway to try and get them on in the right place. So, after the rest of the moves, this is the scene. Note the pair of goblin sniper aces still sat atop the wall, just living their best life. Elsewhere on the board, my own counter-sniper was tucked away in the trees, holding an objective, and Rutabi's Easterlings were advancing on the far side of the board, toward Weathertop. Despite the ongoing amateur enemy at the gates reenactment, there were no casualties in the shooting phase this turn, and we were onto the combats. Aragorn and his ghosties were working their way methodically through the Easterling ranks. However, they would not be able to reach Dernhelm and her warband this turn, which means she would have to face the dragon alone. To assist her in this unenviable task, she called a heroic strike. The dragon, being entirely out of might, could not countercall. This was a golden opportunity to finish what the King of the Dead had begun. She needs a 2 to draw the fight value, and a 3 to beat it. Never mind, we'll just have to hope they don't roll a 6. Or 2 6s, as the case may be. This took the combat from looking like this, to like this, with Dernhelm and Mary both falling, and only a single dismounted rider surviving. Fully intending to add insult to injury, Team Evil decided to use the Palantir they'd just prized from Dernhelm's cold, dead hands to seize priority for the next turn. This turn was our last chance to stop momentum swinging to the enemy, so we called a move with Theoden and they countercalled with Brawgear. This of course means it's time for a roll-off.
So we need a 1, 2 or a 3?
You've asked this gentleman if he'll roll 1 for you.
I'm very good at it.
For you today?
Oh my god!
Yes! Take that, you pleasant, charismatic bastards! We weren't able to reach Brawgear to turn off his heroic move, but we tagged the dragon and the vast majority of Easterlings, so it made little difference. This was our one chance to claw it back. On the other side of the board, the remaining Easterlings were finally storming the ancient watchtower. Before anyone points out that their bases don't actually fit, we decided that anyone on an infantry-sized base could get through the pillars for playability, which allowed me to enjoy this guy trying to crowbar his way through the gap at a near 90-degree angle, forcing the entire weight of his body across rough rock using only his face.
combat. Any heroics?
Yeah, I think I'll spend an Aragorn might point. We've got 8 minutes left.
Do us proud, Aragorn.
5 high. So he could use his last one on might, but let's make him need it.
Aragorn wins the heroic combat, and in order to get his move and help Theoden against Borgir, just needs to kill these 2 guys. With Andriel, he needs only force to kill.
That's 3 wins, so I think
They did.
Nicely done.
yeah, 5. So it's 4 wins in total.
With success in his heroic combat, Aragorn moved into Borgir, who is now facing down both kings of Rohan and Gondor. In the priority combat, the riders started with some modest successes. One killed an Easterling, and then Theoden dispatched Borgir.
And then Dragon.
Right, so I've got 1, 2. I've got a mighty 3.
3 whole dice versus 4 whole dice. I'll show you your misery.
Alright, do it.
Oh, the misery's only a 5! It's only a 5!
I think I'm probably going to need a hug after this. No! Oh, Banner! Banner reroll.
He's in. He's in as well. The cheeky minx is in. I'll give you a hug either way after this.
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. No! We tried our best.
It was a valiant effort.
Yeah, I'd have felt very cheeky if it had happened.
But no knockdowns, because you obviously got the charge.
Yep.
In his wrath, the dragon killed the 2 riders from Theoden's warband who had just joined the fray.
Lovely. Right.
We'll use our last planter.
Oh! Funnily enough, I'm calling in the right move.
So Force Evil used their Palantir for the last turn of priority, and Aragorn called a heroic move to counter. Now, we could no longer feasibly win, but the dragon was carrying both of their Palantirs, so killing them and taking those into the next game would be a superb consolation prize. Given our new objective, with our heroic move, we literally just dogpiled the dragon. So we came to it at last, the great battle of our time, and you know things were getting tense because everyone was gathered around the table, fully obscuring the view.
Should we... Any heroics from you guys?
I think we're heroic strike with Aragorn.
And I think
Seems sensible.
I think I'm going to strike with strike with Theoden as well, just to give us a reroll on it, basically. Yeah.
So I'm basically skipping straight to the dragon combat because let's face it, nothing else really matters now, except for the fact that one of the wall goblins finally died. We may have been on opposite sides of this terrible war, but I respected Wall Goblin number 2's integrity and his decency. He will be missed. So the dragon combat began, our last opportunity to wrestle anything from this game, and well, 2 things in actuality, the 2 Palantirs from the dragon's clutches. The fight began with Theoden's strike roll.
Oh, it's a good start! It's a good start, boys!
I guess we just have to hope that Aragorn would have more luck.
He hates you for carrying.
Oh, fight 10. We'll see if we can make you roll a 6. You need a 6. There's no 6. King of the Dead, also not mightable.
So the fight went to Team Good, with just a couple of wounds left on the dragon, and with Andriel and the King of the Dead in the combat, things were looking good.
Yes.
Yeah, that's 3 wins already.
From who?
Aragorn.
There you go, this is basically in the bag, just for the King of the Dead to finish him off.
No!
Bloody hell, maybe not?
Oh! He's dead.
He dead.
Hi, Dragon. You guys.
So it was over, and the dragon returned to his home planet, never to be seen again. In the end, I was really pleased that the dragon survived those early couple of turns, because if it hadn't, it wouldn't have been such an interesting and tense game. It ended up being closer than I'd expected it would be at 6-3. Whilst we didn't win, we did take the Palantirs, 1 for each of Carl and I to take home, if we could hold them for the rest of the tournament.
So good, so much fun. Thanks very much. Thank you very much. 6-2. Yeah, awesome game. I really enjoyed it.
Next up, and lastly for the day, was Dan and Alex's themey Isengard and Dunland mix. It included Freyda, Gorolf and the Oathmaker for Dunland, and Vrasku and a Shaman for the Uruks. The game was Fog of War, which in short means that in secret, each team is going to nominate a terrain piece they should hold at the end of the game, an enemy character they're going to kill but not their leader, and a friendly character they're going to protect but not their leader. So let's get cracking. We were going to try and hold that big rock over there, we were going to try and protect Dernhelm, and we were going to try and kill the Oathmaker. Team Evil started with 1 Palantir in this game, and we had 2. Theoden held 1, and Aragorn held the other.
Yeah, good luck and good have fun.
So, time for turn 1 priority, and as chance would have it, it went to us. Now, we had to think very carefully on this table. there was almost no line of sight blocking terrain for the cavalry, and yet, as many of you will know, cavalry quarter their movement distance over difficult terrain. So I was moving slowly and exposed to the abundance of Uruk crossbows on the hill. After our first move phase, the board looked like this. Dernhelm's forces were coming up the left, and Theoden's warband had disappeared out of camera shot somewhere up that way. A division of forces which I am confident won't come back to bite me in the ass later. With their move phase, they simply advanced, looking to block off every choke point created by this labyrinth of razor-sharp rock. In the shooting phase, the crossbow-toting Uruks pinged off a rider from Dernhelm's splinter group. They then attempted to snipe out Dernhelm with a single in the way.
You made it so far!
Finally, for this shooting phase, another rider was struck in Dernhelm's group and taken off their horse. And with only 6 riders in that group to start with, each one really hurt.
Horse is going down.
With that turn being done, a miracle happened, and we won a second priority in a row. With their move, Dernhelm's group just shuffled up behind the rock, keeping out of charge range of the enemy for a turn and attempting to protect itself from incoming fire. Elsewhere on the board, the dead simply advanced, hoping against hope that it might be able to find some value before the end of the game, and Theoden's group was in a similar position, galloping around the very edge of the board in some kind of half-assed pincer movement. To their credit, Saruman's forces did not hold back, advancing on all fronts, right up to the King of the Dead in the centre of the board, up to Dernhelm's group on the near side of the board, bringing some of those bloody Crabine in tow. And on the far side of the board, they just sort of let Theoden get on with his own thing, since he was taking the long way round and taking his banner with him for some reason. In the centre, Vrasku's archers were wedged shoulder to shoulder on this little rock, straining to get a better view.
So, 4 shots with the bows. We're going to go all on, what's the face back here?
So this is 4 shots from Dernhelm's group on Freyda with a single in the way, and incidentally, the best volley my riders have ever had. Failing 2 in the ways, they miraculously managed to slay Freyda's human shield. Sorry, we have to pause for a point of interest here. Listen very carefully when I play this again to the person who shouts a big 6 when I make that roll. I'm pretty sure that's the voice of Harry Parkhill, who is playing on the table behind me. Which is interesting because that dice on the table there is an Entmoot dice, which, as most of you will probably already know, is Harry Parkhill's podcast. Link in the description. This makes me wonder, does he just have some kind of supernatural sense to always know when one of his dice has rolled a 6, so he can just celebrate along with you? If so, that walks the finest line between incredibly wholesome and incredibly creepy. So that's a wound on Freyda that they attempt to fate out of the tray and fluff it.
2 shots, these 2 guys on her with an enemy.
So this is a couple of shots at Dernhelm, an opportunity to really hobble us early on, even if they just get the horse. But happily, she is good. In the fights, the rider charging through the gap at the far end killed an Uruk, but in their vengeance, they slew one of the army of the dead, a valuable target. In this turn, we finally whipped out a Palantir to guarantee ourselves the priority. They called a heroic move with Freyda, and we countercalled with Dernhelm. Having not learned lessons from history, I was trusted with the roll-off, and it went about as well as you might expect. With Freyda's heroic move, they did the sensible thing, and simply locked up the front rank of the riders, and turned off Dernhelm's move. In our priority move, the ghosts finally finished their long dawdle towards the enemy line, and Theoden's warband finally came into sight, conquering that big pesky rock in the far corner. Truly, his greatest achievement of the game so far. After an entirely bloodless shooting phase, we were into the fight phase. Aragorn, predictably, used his free might point to call a heroic combat. With some luck, he managed to win his fight, despite Dan really going all in on the noises.
Great noises.
Only just.
With the move off his heroic combat, Aragorn nestled himself really quite snugly amongst a whole bunch of enemy warriors. He was putting a lot of faith in us getting priority next turn. This might not have been the smartest of bets. It was a bloody round of combat in the centre of the boards, and the ghosts suffered a higher rate of attrition than even the Dunland did, a state of affairs that Dan celebrated eloquently.
Angry men!
Dernhelm's group fared no better, losing 2 riders and killing nothing in return. But the remnants of Theoden's group who stayed behind to charge across the rocks did the absolute business. Every single one of them got a kill, including the dismount. So the fighting was done. and Carl and I anxiously declined to spend our second Palantir to win what was presumably going to be a pretty pivotal priority. It seems we needn't have worried with our third priority in a row. Frida called a move, and of course this left little choice but for Dernhelm to call a counter move. She spent Merry's might to do it.
Would you like to roll to determine who's declared the goes first?
Not really, but...
Do it!
Alright,
Do it!
Rohan, I'm using one of the ending moves.
Dernhelm's heroic move was pretty straightforward. The rider who was already dismounted tagged those birds and locked them in combat. An interesting feat I would dearly love to see rendered in film. Another rider voluntarily dismounted to fit through that little gap and tag Frida to stop her from causing problems elsewhere. With priority moves, Theoden's group actually became relevant again, tagging the archers on the hill and finally closing the trap around the blob of orcs at the far side. The banner just set up camp in the middle. I was hoping to get as much mileage out of him as possible. They had their work cut out for them though, as the orcs on the far side formed up en masse in response. Meanwhile, the beleaguered remains of Karl's forces were fighting for their very existence, and it was not looking unlikely that they would be trapped in their entirety this turn or next. Just a brief interlude to show that Seven Stones has a unlimited at-table drinks delivery service. Another example of how highbrow this event really is.
Water for the camper.
Thank you so much. Alright. Impeccable service.
You can have as much free water as you want.
So at this point you might have noticed that I have made a rookie error, one I've made many times before and very much need to stop making because, as in this case, it is potentially devastating. You can see that I made a line of 3 horsemen to attack the archers. The horseman on the far left is then surrounded by Uruks. One of those Uruks is a hero, in this case Vrasku, meaning that they can use a heroic combat to rapidly redeploy quite a large portion of their force, coming to the aid of the other parts of their force that I just charged, meaning that the trappers become the trapeze. As you can see, it comes off without a hitch for them. My horseman is killed, and the Uruks are redistributed around the rest of the combats.
Let's start with Dernhelm. Lovely, so I've got 4 because I charged.
Yeah, 200 with this one.
I've got 6 left. So you want to throw?
Yeah, I'm not going to back away with this one.
Okay, 5? 24, yeah. Cool. Okay, let's just keep working our way down the line. So we've got one swordsman here who's going to shield. 6. And then this one here, who is again 2s. You've got it.
2-handed arm force. Others on 5s.
No, that's unlucky.
Dunland's poor fortune continued after this as I once again defeated those pesky birds and dealt them another wound. Meanwhile, in the centre ground, Aragorn was fighting for his life in a combat against, among others, our assassination target.
So Aragorn wins.
That was worth it.
2 inch fate.
So we killed the Oathmaker and had at least one objective in the bag, but as you can see, we continue to suffer attrition at a very high rate for the rest of the combats. We simply wouldn't last much longer. Theoden won his combat and killed all of his opponents, meaning he was safe with his Palantir for at least one more turn. The trouble continued on the far side of the board. Those riders who'd splintered from Theoden's group at the beginning of the game and who'd done so well despite losing their charge bonuses finally began to fall to the master Uruks. Personally, I blame those damn birds. Portents of ill fortune they are. With only minutes left in the game, we decided to use our second Palantir, but they used theirs as well, which means we went to a roll-off anyway.
They take it.
Since Aragorn could not be their target, the combats that really mattered to us this turn were the King of the Dead, Dernhelm, and Theoden. Theoden held a Palantir and was within striking distance of Vrasku's, so we really wanted to keep him alive. In the move phase, everyone just sort of reconnected, so the table looked like this. On the far side, Gorulf called a combat, and Theoden called a strike to overcome the Fight 5 Vrasku he was in combat with. We started with the lone dismounted warrior on the far side, who was facing Gorulf's heroic combat and about a million other attacks.
That's a champion, you're in trouble now. Too bad he's killed 2 guys in 2 turns.
He has.
It's what? Yes, it's a high bar. Oh, what?
Predictably and understandably, Gorulf then joined Theoden's combat.
Was it Ogre?
Yeah, it's yours.
It's Ogre. Where we go?
That way? That way? Yeah, Theoden first. Theoden first.
Right, I get 4 because I did charge.
Yeah.
Do you want to send the bar?
I do, and I want it to be a high bar.
6.
Since Vrasku had the Palantir, I piled all of my attacks on him.
He got charged, so he's not prone.
Move 4 into currently difficult terrain.
With Vrasku dead, Carl and I enjoyed one glorious, fleeting moment in which we actually held 3 Palantirs. Team Evil took quick revenge though by cutting down the King of the Dead. The King's so nice, they killed him twice. Or something, I don't know.
Aragorn and his many opponents. 5 Dunland men.
So this is Aragorn fighting for his life against 6 dastardly villains. At this point in the game, to be honest, this fight didn't really have much of an impact on the outcome, but we wanted to vent our righteous fury through Aragorn. Aragorn rolled a particularly pathetic 4 against Dunland's 5 and spent the might to win the fight. We were then on to Dernhelm's side, who was leading another desperate fight against Freda. One rider went down, but luckily we took a couple of the Dunlanders with us. We were now broken, and despite some moderate successes this turn, the only hope we really had now was that they would roll a 1 or a 2 and bring the game to an end. But they couldn't even do that. It was at least quite a cinematic picture, as our heroes fought to the last, and the hordes of foes closed in around them. Although if this was some kind of Act 3 climactic fight scene, you would expect something to be on the horizon to save them, and no luck. Straight into the fight phase, and it was time to call our heroics.
I will strike with his last might.
So that's Theoden and Gorolf going to a strike-off. But first it was time for the priority combats, starting with Dernhelm, and thanks to a bloody cocked dice that turned a 5 to a 6, the celebrity power couple mixing Merry and Éowyn, known as Dernhelm rather than Pipperwyn, was killed. In return, at least Aragorn managed to obliterate 2 mindless goons, and we were then on to the big one.
And then Theoden's combat, so Gorolf and Theoden both do strikes.
Yeah, come on, big strike. Great.
Theoden was outstriked, or outstruck, and his dual roll didn't go much better. So Gorolf won the fight, and despite the cocked dice doing me a favour this time and turning a 6 into a 2, it really was the end.
Goodbye, and
Gorolf just goes up behind him.
This is the saddest moment of the day. Good game, well done. Good game, guys. Good game.
Our objective was to kill Theoden.
Oh, bloody hell!
And we had to protect the Uruk-hai Shade.
So at the end of the day, Team Evil had really quite run away with it, including quite literally with our Palantirs, and it is unreasonable how much that hurt. It had been a fun, if tough game for us against 2 skilled opponents who knew how to get a lot of mileage out of some ostensibly chaff miniatures, or at least chaffier than our more elite forces. I think I had a fair amount of luck, but failed to capitalise on it by making some very silly mistakes. Carl, unfortunately, was just struggling to win some very winnable fights. At the end of the day, we were simply outplayed, and Dan and Alex went on to the top tables the next day by winning our group on this day. Whilst that brought our games to a close, the action wasn't over yet. This is the Arena of Champions. In this challenge, each player in each pair will pick a hero from their army worth less than 100 points to be their champion. They can make up any shortfall under 100 points by buying Might, Will and Fate for 5 points per pop. My hero is Dernhelm, which of course could potentially be 2 models, Merry and Éowyn, which is cheeky, and don't take my word for it, this is the betting sheet. You will see my entry listed as Dernhelm, brackets, cheeky, brackets closed. I was joined by Carl's Herald of the Dead. The other pairs were a Mahud Beastmaster and Mummock Warleader, Gorolf and Vrasku, and Brorgir and a Goblin called Damien. Now if you want any clarity on that last one, I'm afraid I just can't offer it to you. It was an actual Goblin called Damien with a shed load of Might, Will and Fate. Needless to say, we all wished the little rascal well. That's more than I could say for Dernhelm, who everyone wanted dead at the first opportunity. The animosity at the table was palpable, as was demonstrated when the Vrasku-Gorolf pair went first, and Vrasku scored a wound on Dernhelm's horse. Frankly, it didn't help me make friends when I used Horse Lord to save it on Fate. My troubles weren't over because Vrasku can shoot twice, and he managed to achieve exactly the same outcome again. I failed my Fate roll on a 3, but with my abundance of might, I simply spent one to keep my horse. Next it was our turn, and for honour and for longevity, I charged Vrasku. My spear on the way in did nothing, predictably, but I ended up winning the ensuing fight. Knocking Vrasku to the dust, we registered 2 wounds on 6s, although looking back, I should certainly have been doing them on 5s. Vrasku saved, but used all of his fate to do so. Then the Herald kind of just ambled up, getting close. Essentially, I was exploiting him, using him as a battery, since the TO had agreed that I could spend his will to do heroic actions as if I was the King of the Dead. In their turns, the Mummock Warmaster, Beastmaster, Brorgir and Damien really started to close in. It is not paranoia to say they were gunning for Dernhelm. In their turn, Vrasku just hit me back, but through the expenditure of a lot of might, Dernhelm won the fight and did another wound on a 6 and again ignored the 5. Thanks to all the heroic resources everyone had, this back and forth went on for a while, but eventually, Dernhelm succeeded. Merry drove his thumbs into Vrasku's eye sockets, whilst Eowyn sat back proudly, just like in the films. Carl decided that the Herald would bravely charge Gorulf. Then he bravely changed his mind. Then he decided it would bravely charge the Mummock War Leader. Then he bravely changed his mind again. Then he decided to bravely sit this one out. And who can blame him? I'd essentially drained all of his resources to achieve basically nothing. The Mummock boys charged the King of the Dead and did a wound which basically trained him of fate, but he did survive. Gorulf then charged Dernhelm, looking to wreak a terrible vengeance for his fallen friend Vrasku. He succeeded, killing Eowyn, and Merry was thrown from the saddle, and sadly the fall was just too much for him. It was a tough moment, but at least my opponents and dare I say friends were magnanimous in victory. Sadly, I'd left the Herald essentially defenceless, and he followed soon after. To everyone's slight surprise, the winners in our group were the Mummock Riders. However, they had taken a bit of a beating, and they had to go into the championships with whatever wounds, will, might, and fate they had left. Unfortunately, I didn't get footage of the most raucous bits, but people got so into it. Chanting, shouting, standing on chairs, an absolute spectacle. In the end, Gimli, controlled by Jay, was the winner, but I don't think it was received quite how they'd hoped. To win, they'd had to kill the runner-up, Baldo Tulpenny, the Hobbit, and I will let the attendees tell you whose side they were on.
People call us nerds.
After this, 7 teams were nominated for Best Army. Best Army is considered to be the main prize at 7 stones, and each nominee receives a card representing one of the 7 Palantiri, the Seeing Stones, to use the next day. Each one grants them a buff they can use in each game. Lastly for the night, there was classic pub quiz fare, and then I headed back to the van for an early night. I camped out in this sleepy side street, but that's just between us. I can't wait to show you more of this incredible tournament on day 2, where, and I promise I've checked, the microphones work start to finish. My many thanks to Damien, Tom, and the other organisers. Remember, if you want to throw money at me to buy stupid nonsense rather than saving for something meaningful for yourself, then my Buy Me a Coffee link is in the description, as well as various other social media channels. Thank you very much indeed for watching. I found the world's loudest ever door.